May Christ be present among us today. If he is here in both the speaking and the understanding, that our time together will not be in vain. Before I get started with my topic, I would like to bless those who possess the vision and the courage to bring this meeting to fruition. It is encouraging in more recent years to see an increase in interest in our Anabaptist history and theology. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Shipshewana, Indiana, for a similar gathering. They were planning for 600 to 800. Later on, it turned into they're planning for 1,000. Then it was 1,500. And as it turned out, it was over 1,600 people. Amish, mostly Amish and older people from all kinds of places. That's very encouraging. It is my observation that across the various Anabaptist groupings today, we, as an Anabaptist peoplehood, have largely lost the original Anabaptist vision. And we're suffering as a result of that. When I see meetings like this happen, it encourages me because there's not just a culture behind this whole thing. There is actually the power of Christ, and he will dwell where he is honored, and he will quietly as a gentleman dismiss himself if he's not honored. We can have a human program, or we can have Christ's program with humans cooperating. The second thing that distresses me is that we have remained largely ignorant of our own story. So I could cry about that, or I could do something. So I've decided, instead of crying, I'm going to do something. And so for those of you who are here who would like to get a good start, I would recommend Smith's Story of the Mennonites, 5th edition. The job of a teacher is always to work himself out of a job. I could never, all the speakers here together, will never be able to say everything that should be said. But if you read this thick book, 5th edition, you will get a good coverage. This covers all 3 branches: the Swiss people, the Dutch Mennonites, and the Hutterites, all 3, from their origins largely to the present. And this book, Introduction to Mennonite History by Cornelius Dick, 3rd edition, does largely the same thing. This is an introduction. There is a multitude of books that you can pursue after the introduction. Those who don't know the past are condemned to repeat it. And I just see it happening among us today. And it's, like I said, I could cry or I could do something about it. And I thoroughly believe that the Anabaptist vision provides many answers to the ills of this generation. But we don't know what those answers are. And so therefore we are limited in what we can do to serve this generation. So once again, I just salute the people who put this program together as an answer to help us get started for thinking about these issues. I have 6 objectives with this first topic here this morning. My title is State Church and Spiritual Darkness. Okay, so it's unlimited what I could talk about here this morning. So first of all, my first objective is to create a sense of the age of that time. We live in 2025. We struggle to understand our own age. But the age prior to the rise of the Anabaptist movement, we don't know much about. So I'm, in a very limited way, going to try to introduce you to some of the feelings, the imagery of that day. Second objective, please hear me on this. My objective is that we do not feel superior and look down on the people that I'm going to talk about today, the characters. We're going to consider them from our vantage point, but we do not understand all that made them be what they were. And people who study our age someday will wonder what was wrong with those people. Why did they do those things? I do not want us to feel superior in any way. I want us to be just looking at that and thinking about that and be humble about everything we talk about. Thirdly, we understand that God is sovereign in history. It's his story, as we were already reminded. We cannot explain everything, or we cannot explain why everything happened as it did. Somehow God moves behind the scenes in ways that we can understand. So we want to acknowledge that. The fourth objective is that I want to remind us this morning that human nature remains the same today as it was then. The people then struggled with the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. So do we. There's nothing new there. Fifthly, I'm speaking to largely a group of Swiss people. Is there anybody with a Dutch, Russian, or Hutterite background present today? Not a single soul. In Indiana, there were a few who were in that crowd. Okay, so we as Swiss, German people, we need to pay attention to the fact that we inherited, by no choice of our own, many of the things that we do, the ways of our thinking, our culture. It's inherited by being German and Swiss. It does not all rise out of Anabaptist vision. The Dutch, Russian people also had an Anabaptist vision, but their culture is very different from the Swiss people. And the Hutterites also came out of this very same vision, and they came from the Tyrol, a little bit different background, and went to Moravia, and they have another kind of culture. So we just need to be honest about the Swiss and German culture that we have inherited in this story. So, all of us sitting here are largely homogeneous. We have no Chinese background. We have no Persian background. We don't even have Native American background. We are some of the people who chased the Native Americans off their land, or at least came in soon after they were pushed off. And that's a story of its own. I don't want to go there. And where I live in a Spanish culture. And our culture is very different from a Spanish culture. Okay, sixth objective. Those who do not know the past are condemned to repeat it. And this is happening before my eyes. My job today is to invite you into the past with a humble heart and to look at that past, think about that past, and do something about the present when you have that past. The opportunities are endless. I just gave you 2 books as introductions, but there are historical documentaries, and there are like Muddy Creek Library and other kind of resources. In Indiana, it was a historical library, an invaluable resource. And then there are other resources other places. I even teach at the Abiding Peace Virtual School, and I will teach you history if you take it with myself as a teacher. I care about these things very much. All right, now getting into the topic directly. So what we're talking about in pre-Reformation times is medieval times. And medieval times were very different from our times. It's the time of castles. These castles were so well made, you can go to Europe today and you can visit castles. My son lives in Ireland, and that's where I'm most familiar with the castles. And believe it or not, if you visit a castle and you have a spiral stairway, every stairway, you go up counterclockwise. It's probably true of every castle there is. And the answer, you might say, why is that? Why is that important? Well, it so happens that most people are right-handed. And if the enemy comes up from down below, he is limited what he can do with his right hand if he's against the central spiral. And the people who are defending from the top are free with their right hand to fight those who are trying to come up. Just a little free tidbit. Many of these castles have fallen into ruin. Some of them have been restored. If you ever get to Europe, make sure you visit one of these places. You get a chance to feel what it was like. It's the lords and the ladies who lived in these places, but they were cold places. They were not full of warmth. At the castle in Ghent that I visited, more than 110 Anabaptists were killed there. At first, they would kill them outside the castle wall to be an example to the people. But the common people looked at the power of these people and they said, "What glorious dying! I would like to have what these people have." And it was bringing people to the faith rather than scaring them from it. And so they killed the rest of the Anabaptists inside the castle walls so nobody could see it. So castles are an important part of the story. Now, this is just somebody's painting of a German village. This is kind of idealized. You can see it's a painting. But it gives you a little feeling of what our ancestors and our ancestors' neighbors, what it was like. Now, like I said, that's kind of idealized. But this is probably a little bit more realistic, but maybe this is a little bit on the dark side. This is probably more of what it was like. Again, we cannot identify with that. This is the way the people lived every day in pre-Reformation times. That's a market day. If you notice, up in the right hand, no, in the top of the picture, let me see if I can get a laser pointer here. Can you see up in here? That's the castle up here. There were no real countries back in those days. As I'm going to show you, the map was just all kinds of little kingdoms. Well, the king may have lived in a castle like this. And the towns, there were no towns at first. Everything was centered around the castles. But eventually, towns grew up at intersections of roads and became markets. And if you read in literature, Perspectives of Truth in Literature, the story of a piece of string, that's a very good picture of what medieval markets functioned like. And so this gives you a little bit of a picture of that. Okay, so here's the common people. This is probably the way they dressed. This is probably the way they were. You notice there's not a lot of furniture in the house. Table and chairs. Not much else. This is present day people putting on medieval peasant clothing. This is the upper class. These are the people who lived in the castles now. You can see a level of wealth that the other pictures do not manifest. Men, women, and children. This picture is Charlemagne being crowned king of the Holy Roman Empire on Christmas Day, 800 AD. Are you aware that most of you sitting in this room are probably a descendant of him? I can't go into the genealogy to prove that, but I would like to think about this picture a little bit. You'll notice that on the left side of the picture, over, I don't know why this is not working. Anyway, on the left side of the picture, you can see it's dark. On the right hand of this picture, you can see more light. Okay, so Charlemagne was coming out of the barbarians. Our people were all barbarians, every one of us sitting here. It was our people and relatives of our people and similar groups of our people who brought Rome to its knees in 476 and destroyed it. That's just the political side. The religious side remained with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so Charlemagne was one of the first ones who brought some order to this vast group of barbarians. Okay, so he had several wives, and I don't know which of his wives are being portrayed here, but you are likely a descendant of one of those wives. Okay, what I want to point out is that Charlemagne is kneeling on a royal cushion, and he's holding a sword in his right hand. And the Pope Leo III, is crowning him. The important thing is that the lesser is crowned by the greater. So at this point, the church is supreme over the political realm. The Pope is placing the crown. And you notice on the right-hand side, we have all kinds of other church officials. The barbarians are coming out of darkness into the light in this picture. Here's what the church hierarchy looked like. The Pope was at the top. We just saw his picture. Below him were the cardinals, and then archbishops, and then the bishops, and then the priests, and the deacons, and at the bottom were the laity. There were many more laity than there were church people. But this is very much of a hierarchy. Word came from the top. For example, Henry IV, which is one of the Holy Roman emperors. No, he wasn't. He was just an emperor. But he got into an argument with the Pope, disagreed with the Pope. And so to punish him, the Pope put his kingdom under interdict. Interdict meant that the sacraments of the church could no longer happen. In other words, you couldn't have Mass every week. Mass stopped. Well, the common people needed to go to Mass to get grace. You could not have babies anymore because they could not be baptized. Because you had to have a child baptized by the 8th day. And you couldn't die anymore because you had to be buried in holy ground. And if there's no priest around to bless the holy ground, you couldn't be buried there. And furthermore, you couldn't get married because the church had to do the marrying. And so the people put pressure on Henry. Henry, humble yourself before the Pope. Go listen to him. And under pressure, Henry went to the palace at Canossa and sought an audience with the Pope. The Pope was pleased that he was out there. He thought, okay, Henry's out there. He could just stay out there for 3 days in the cold. And after 3 days, the Pope allowed Henry to come in. First thing he had to do was kiss the Pope's big toe as a sign of who is in charge. Of course, Henry didn't forget that. And later on, there was a war that involved Rome. And believe it or not, Henry's forces captured Rome and chased the Pope off, the same Pope. Chased him into the wilderness where he had to suffer, and he died soon after. So who won in the end? I'll let you figure that out. So this is just as an illustration of how this whole thing worked. The people at the bottom were illiterate. They could not read or write. And the churches had to have stained glass windows because the Bible stories were in the windows. The stained glass told Bible stories. The Bible of the poor is what the cathedrals were. And the cathedrals were large and ornate so that people who walked in felt like they were in the presence of majesty. And they were lofty. God is lofty. You are in a place where God is. And so the cathedrals were as they were. Okay, this particular slide brings up another side of the church. If you notice on the right side, we have the Pope at the top, but the Pope is over both secular clergy and regular clergy. Well, the secular clergy are the ones who dealt with the normal churches throughout the Holy Roman Empire. There were bishops and priests, and I already showed you the hierarchy. On the right side are the regular clergy. You see, back in those days, the people were considered imperfect. You couldn't expect them to live uprightly. That's why they're called imperfect. That's why I had to go take the sacraments. That's why the church is in control of everything. The Holy Mother Church took care of you from the time you were born till you died and guaranteed you a place in heaven if you submitted there. The other side is what is called here the perfect. And that's what we mean by the regular clergy. These are the people who went into monasteries and convents because they dedicated themselves to God. They're the ones who took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. These are the people who kept alive the copying of the scriptures down through the generations. And at the bottom you see the friars, the monks, and the nuns. But in this particular picture, this is where Michael Sattler worked. Michael Sattler was a Benedictine monk before he became an Anabaptist. And this is the place where he worked. He heard of Martin Luther and what Martin Luther was doing. He heard about what was happening down in Zurich, and eventually he left this to join that movement. I think Lester or somebody is going to talk more about that shortly. Okay, so here's just a picture of a monastery. It's probably forsaken today, it's empty, but that's what a monastery looked like. There were all kinds of monasteries. That's a monastery in Provence, France. The blue that you see is lavender. I've never visited one of those monasteries. I would like to sometime. But it's in the monasteries where people were literate, where people could learn, where people had books. The other people, the common people, were just illiterate. So if you play chess, you are playing a game about those days. The pawns out front in the first line were the illiterate, the laity out front. Behind, in the center, were the king and the queen. The rooks at the two ends are the castles. And you notice there's both knights and bishops. And you play the game. It's a kind of medieval warfare kind of game. Believe it or not, the game of chess is a very good way to develop a person's mind. A young person gets an education just by playing chess. So that's free, whatever it's worth. Okay, so back in those days, the village cathedral dominated the landscape. Religion was the most important thing for the people. Today, people are trying to forget religion. Back in those days, it was the all-important thing. And that tall steeple marked the place of the church. And every cathedral was different. This is a picture of a cathedral, and cathedrals have bells. Bells that mark the time of day. They didn't have clocks. But the cathedral would mark out the hours. And the cathedral bells would call people to worship. If there was a funeral, they would ring the bells. If there's some kind of other event, they would ring the bells. The church was the physical, the social, the political, and spiritual focal point of daily village life. Everything centered around the church. Today, churches are dying in the towns. It's very opposite today than what it once was. Now, with this slide, this is going to be focusing on the secular side. Now, I know that some of this is pretty small for you to see, but on the left side, we have these words, the political system. Decentralized local government. You notice the king at the top there. Under him are the lords, vassals to that king. Under the lords, we have the knights, which are vassals to the lords. And under the lords, we have the peasants, the serfs, or the pawns on the chess game. So these people on the left side, it says, dependent upon the relationship between the members of the nobility. Everybody served their place. If you were a knight, you did a knight's thing. You didn't move up to become a lord or move down to be a peasant. You just stayed a knight, unless you had some kind of special privilege. I had a friend who died now, but his name was Clyde McKnight. Mick means son. He was the son of a knight. That has come down to the present. The Lord and his vassals administered justice and were the highest authority of the land. That's just the way the social side and political side of things worked. Now, on the economic side, on the right side, agriculture was the basis for wealth. Everybody farmed. That was the job of the peasants. The lands were divided up into self-sufficient manors. That means that group of people who lived in that manor, related to that castle, they sustained themselves. They had various artisans who provided the various skills. For example, the shoemaker and the weavers and the farmers. And there probably was not a school, so they probably didn't have any schools unless there was a monastery. And many people would try to send at least one of their children to a monastery. They gave one of their children to the church, and that gave them some special favors. But that was also a way to advance your child up out of serfdom into the next higher level. So the peasants, the serfs, worked the land and paid rent in exchange for protection. So the lords would protect them. If the neighboring manor would attack them, all the peasants would grab swords and pitchforks and go fight. So there was this symbiotic system. The peasants would fight for the Lord, and the Lord would protect them. The peasants would do all this work, some of it for themselves, but a lot of it for the Lord. But in addition to the Lord, they also had to pay taxes to the church. And this is a big deal because the peasants were so loaded down with everything that they had to do for other people, they could hardly survive. And whenever our ancestors saw this, I'll get to this shortly, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. They called those cathedrals stone piles. They were built at the expense of the local people. I'll talk more about that, I better stop right now. But back in those days, barter was the usual form of exchange. Money, there was very little money around. Maybe some gold was exchanged between some of the upper classes, but not on the bottom. And when you went to market, you exchanged. All right, this picture gives you a picture of Europe. Look at Germany there, all those little kingdoms. I have several maps here. So here's another one. And here's another one. This is the Holy Roman Empire, about 1512. This is just before the Anabaptist movement started. You notice down the Swiss Confederation, it's kind of all one unit. It's Germany that was so divided up. The Swiss had cantons. All right, I got to keep moving here. So the people of the time understood that the world, the way it was composed of heavenly hierarchy and the earthly hierarchy. I've already been talking about the earthly hierarchy. So now let's look at the heavenly hierarchy. In heaven, the common people taught by the Roman Catholic Church believed that God was up here at the top, and then we had Christ and the Blessed Virgin Mary and the apostles, and then the archangels, and then the angels, and then we have the saints. Okay, there's a lot of theology there. We'll just leave that. On the earthly side, I've already talked to you about the temporal state, the one side of the pyramid that I just showed you, where we have the emperors, the kings, and below them the dukes and the princes, and below them the barons and the knights and the workers. On the right side, the spiritual side, we have the pope, the cardinals, the archbishops, the bishops, and the clergy. And the Roman Catholic Church controlled all the people through 7 sacraments. If you look at some of the old pictures, they're stylized art. Now, this is actually some kind of humanism already in focus here. But some of the old art, it's like you ask, why did they paint those people like that? They don't even look human. Well, Christian humanism was introduced, and this particular picture is the product of Christian humanism. And if I would be in class with you, we would take time. The 7 sacraments are pictured in that picture. That's an altarpiece by so-and-so. But that is how you controlled the people, through sacraments. And here are the list of the 7 sacraments. Baptism, 8 days. Confirmation, later, about 12 or 13. Confession. How many of you folks here have ever visited a Roman Catholic church? I want to see your hands. Many of you, bless your hearts. Okay, so you probably saw confessionals. Okay, now sometimes we kind of raise our eyebrows at that. But are you aware that by confessing in those days and today, as people confess to somebody else, it actually creates better mental health than if people just confess to Christ the way the Protestants have taught us. There are more mental and emotional health issues because of no person-to-person confession. That's a subject in itself. We're not going further. Okay, Mass happened every day. In the Mass, the Roman Catholics practiced that the people receive the wafer. And that's an elaborate process to sanctify that wafer. But in the Eastern Orthodox, in Coptic Orthodox, the people receive both the wafer and the wine. In Roman Catholicism, the priest only drank the wine. And again, there's a reason for all that. But these people believe that if Christ has been sanctified and made holy, there may not a crumb fall to the floor. In the Coptic Orthodox, when the priest puts it in their mouth, they have a handkerchief in their hands. As soon as he puts it in, they put the handkerchief over their mouth so that not a crumb is trampled underfoot. And in Coptic Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox, mothers bring their babies. And if the baby is large enough or old enough to receive the wine, the priest takes a spoon and puts the wine into the child's mouth and as well into the mother's mouth. And so, if you go to some of those churches, there's lots and lots of people. And so I asked a priest one time, or a person who was in that tradition, aren't you concerned about sanitation? No, we're not one bit concerned, because the wine is so powerful it'll kill all the germs. That's their concept of how important the bread and the wine are. Okay, so one of the reasons why our people were considered, our children were illegitimate, because only the church could marry. And if our people who came out of that married with the proper authority in our own context, they were still not considered married, and the children were considered illegitimate and could not inherit property. Okay, I'm taking too much time. I've got to keep moving. This is just a picture of the Roman Catholic clergy at work. As I've been indicating, the clergy had total control of European illiterate population. As long as people can be kept ignorant, the leaders can control them. So it's dangerous to have people become literate, and it's especially dangerous if they start reading the Bible. It's only the clergy who is qualified to interpret God's holy word. Okay, so I have this book, Cathedrals, Castles, and Caves. I don't know if Andrew has any of those copies back there or not. Andrew, do you have copies? You don't have any. Okay, you can get this from CAM, TGS. This is probably the best that I know of to give you a picture of what was going on in this time. This is the origins of the Anabaptist faith, but it only brings up to the Reformation, just like this topic is. So that's a very good book to follow through with. I'm reading now from this particular book. From about AD 590 to 1517, the Roman Catholic Church controlled not only religious, but also politics, morals, art, writing, and education. Its teachings of God, heaven, and hell were very real to the people, and they lived in terror of the horrors of hell. The church taught that the only way to get to heaven was through the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy Mother Church. Anyone who disagreed was not only in serious danger of losing their salvation, that's on the religious side, but also of punishment from the authorities. The secular was married to the religious. And so you were in double trouble if you disagreed with the church. This is a terrible part of the history preceding the Reformation. This is to illustrate the Crusades. From 1095, which is the launching of the First Crusade, for about 200 years, the Roman Catholic Church encouraged holy war, trying to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslims. 11 separate crusades, depending on how you count them. But listen, when the Muslims think about Christians, this is what they think of today. The story here was so terrible. Just go in and butcher people in the name of Christ. And in the evening, take Mass. Take the bread, get Christ inside, and go out and butcher more Muslims the next day. And then take Mass and get cleaned up and go butcher more Muslims. How much common sense is that? The Muslims still remember that. Another terrible thing that happened in about 1350 was the Black Death that swept over Europe. It killed about 1/3 of the entire European population, 25 million people. It was carried by rats and fleas. But the people around them noticed that the Jews did not die as frequently as the normal German. And the reason was the Jews had kosher. They were clean. And the bubonic plague, the Black Death, spread whenever rats were allowed to be around, and the fleas jumped off the rats onto the people and bit them. If the rat had a disease, and he passed that disease on to the person. If a person had a disease and had fleas on, the flea that went from a diseased person to a non-diseased person also got the sickness. It was an awful, awful, awful time. Sometimes almost whole towns just died out because of this. Even Conrad Grebel later on died of the plague. He was not martyred. He died of this. Okay, so the people were just stressed. Why are we all dying? God must be judging us. Okay, this is another major thing. This was a major revolutionary idea where Gutenberg invented the press. Now, if you could learn to read, the cost of books dropped drastically, and you could print and spread material around. The Reformation could not have happened without the Gutenberg printing press, because the ideas were just spread all over the place. Okay, that was about 1450, notice. Okay, so now I got to talk to you a little bit about the bad popes. This is Pope Alexander VI. He lived from 1492 to 1503. At this period of time, the church was a disaster. At the top, this man used the church to enrich himself. He fathered many children by a number of mistresses, and he's supposed to be the Pope. This is Pope Boniface VIII, who reigned from 1294 to 1303. This guy was contentious. He feuded with King Philip IV. He was termed a demon and placed by Dante in the 8th circle of hell, believe it or not. Constantine built the St. Peter's Church in Rome, but it got old, and by 1505 they needed to tear it down, start over. This is what it supposedly looked like after Constantine was finished up until about 1500. I see that I'm not going to be able to do this, but this man, Julius II, was a warrior pope. He died in 1513. And if I had had time, I would have read to you some of the stuff that Erasmus wrote about him. He was actually dead when Erasmus satirized him in this title, Julius Exclusus. It is humorous. So Martin Luther, and Lester will probably talk more about it, he was bombastic. He would make strong statements. But Erasmus was very polite. And his way of attacking all these evils, he set Europe rocking with laughter in making fun of what was going on at the top. Okay, so I've got to hasten here. This man followed the Pope Julius II. This is Pope Leo X. And when Martin Luther started stirring things, he said this, "Lord, a wild boar has been loosed in thy vineyard." I'll just leave Lester take care of the rest of that. But it says here, never has a pope been so dedicated to expensive earthly pleasures than Pope Leo X. He spent the huge fortune left by his predecessor in just 2 years. He spent, in 2 years, all the money the previous pope had gathered together. Leo had a fetish for bawdy jokes and obscene comedies which were often performed in the Vatican with cardinals and as actors. To maintain his lavish lifestyle, he sold indulgences. An indulgence was a pardon from hell for sins such as murder, polygamy, sacrilege, perjury, and witchcraft. His nepotism was as corrupt as any pope, appointing his son to cardinal at age 14. When his cardinals conspired to kill him, he had the flesh of their servants ripped off with red-hot pincers to extract information. At a large bouquet of dignitaries, Leo X made the most infamous and damaging statement about Christianity in the history of the church. Get this, listen. How well we know what a profitable superstition this fable of Christ has been for us and our predecessors. You meditate on that for a while. I've got to move on. So this man, Pope Leo, when he decided they're going to have to raise money to build this new church of St. Peter's down in Rome. Got to find money somewhere. So they just came up with the idea of selling indulgences. And so this is Pope Leo's reasons for selling indulgences. The first benefit to be obtained is the complete forgiveness of all sins. There's no greater grace than this. For thereby sinful man obtains God's grace once again. In addition to the forgiveness of sins, those penalties are remitted which a person could have to endure in purgatory because he has insulted the divine majesty. It should also be noted that each person should have true repentance in his heart. Furthermore, a person should make a confession or at least have the firm intention to do so. Furthermore, he should visit 7 specifically designated churches and each one say 5 Our Fathers and 5 Hail Marys. Besides, each person must, according to his station and financial status, place a sum of between 25 Rhenish gulden and 1.5 gulden in the indulgences chest. The third benefit consists in a share in the treasury of the merits of the entire church. All who contribute money toward the construction of St. Peter's Church in Rome, as well as their blessed deceased parents, are to be included in petitions, intercessions, alms, fastings, prayers, and pilgrimages. That's the benefit. And the fourth benefit grants the plenary remission of all sins to the souls in purgatory. The Pope bestows this from the Church's storehouse of merits on the condition that those still living place a contribution in the indulgence chest. The indulgence preachers are to recommend the benefit with special emphasis and urgency because in this manner the souls of the dead can best be helped and also ample funds are to be gathered for St. Peter's. You give money, you can get forgiveness for your ancestors and for yourselves. Give money. And not only will you benefit you and your ancestors, but you can build the church down in Rome. But that's not the whole story. What's not mentioned is that half the money gathered was to assist German Albert of Brandenburg, a young professional churchman. At age 23, he was Archbishop of Magdeburg and administrator of Halberstadt. It was against canon law to hold more than one office, but everybody was doing it. It was a great way to play politics. So when the Archbishopric of Mainz became available, Prince Albert sought to add a third office to his resume, the most politically powerful of all. The problem was Albert was low on cash. It seems he had spent his liquid assets in getting the post he already held, and Pope Leo was asking a colossal sum to purchase this office. Got to raise money. So half the money that was collected was for this guy. But nobody ever said anything about that. And here's a picture of them gathering the money. Tetzel said, when a copper into the coffer rings, A Soul from Purgatory Springs. And they would play on people's emotions. Well, don't you want your grandpa who had problems, don't you want him out of purgatory? How can you love your grandpa if you don't give money to get him out of purgatory, or at least reduce some of his time there? And they played on people's emotions. Okay, so here's Pope Leo again. He finally excommunicated Martin Luther in 1521. I'll let Lester talk to you about that. But he mysteriously died about 6 months later. In conclusion, after they had St. Peter's built, this is what it looked like. This is the new St. Peter's. And part of that was gotten through indulgence money. And this is what it looks like today, up closer. It was 120 years in building. It's the largest church building in the world, holds 20,000 people. You can still visit to this day. Inside, this is what it looks like. And there's even relics in there. That's a dead pope. And I guess we'll just stop with this. This is Martin Luther before, when he was a conscientious man on the left. And the picture on the right is what we usually see of Martin Luther. Thank you very much for your attention. There are a few other things that I could show you, but I'll just let Lester pick it up from here.